I want to make the case today why I think Civ 7 is the best Civ game in the franchise, specifically for new players, and how all of the changes they've made with this game are really important steps in the right direction from Firaxis, and how this, I think, is going to help scale the game in the future. Hey everyone, this is Connor from Civ Haus, and like I said, I'm here today to talk about why I think Civ 7 has this great appeal for new players, and why I think that that is an important change. I've got a written version of this as well on the gamehouse.com if you'd like to check that out. We are a part of the Gamehouse network, so be sure to check out the website. And obviously like and subscribe to this video if you're enjoying the content. We always appreciate all the support we can get. But I want to talk about today some of the changes that Civ 7 has made and how I think they are the best for new players and why. So, with games and franchises like the Civilization franchise that have been making games for over a decade, and a lot of their games have been somewhat similar, there's going to inevitably come a time where these developers have to decide, do we make a wide-swinging change? Do we kind of swing for the fences to try and bring new players in? And how does that affect our loyal, kind of tenured fan base that we've had for years? This, I think, happens more in Civ 7 than any previous iteration, and I kind of want to talk about why. So, Civ fans have been used to mostly, like I said, the same experience with slight deviations. We might have a graphics change, we may have a gameplay feature come and go, but the core and kind of the heart of the series has remained the same for years. And to an extent, Civ 7 is no different. You have hexagonal tiles, and you're playing against other empires, you're trying to build a massive empire yourself, yada yada yada. So in the sense, it is clearly a Civ game. However, in particular with the introduction of ages and the ability to pair different leaders and civilizations, it feels like this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, core gameplay shift that Civilization has ever had as a franchise. But I think that begs the question, is a change of this dramatic of a magnitude more appealing for a new player, or is it actually more appealing for a long-time player who is looking for a kind of a new experience within a game they already love? Or can it appeal equally to both? Is this question even worth asking? So, one thing I think that is key is that ages, towns, legacy paths, a lot of the changes they've introduced at a core level of Civ 7 simplify and streamline the game. That is a huge point I want to make here. So, think about it. You're playing a game of Civ 6, and you just play it from start to finish. There's a beginning and an end. Civ 7, you kind of have three mini-games. You play a game of Antiquity. Then maybe you stop. Maybe you do an advanced start in Modern Age. There are a lot of different ways to approach the game to allow a player who might play more casually to get in those Modern Age reps where that would have been impossible in a previous game. They can start in the Modern Age, if they just happen to like the kind of Industrial Revolution era, they can play that exclusively and just do advanced starts. That's certainly not me. I'm a big Antiquity Age player, so I found myself playing a lot of Antiquity Age games, kind of getting to the end, feeling good about where I'm at, and stopping. Not feeling necessarily the need to push into the Exploration Age, whereas in past games, I feel like I kind of felt like a quitter for doing that. So these ages, I think, have broken down the game into a much more palatable way. It feels like a new player can come in and enjoy this game just like a veteran would, and I feel like with a lot of the changes, they would have far less questions coming into a game. Okay, we've talked about ages. Let's talk about towns, legacy paths, some other things, right? So let's kind of walk through some of the changes that Civ 7 has introduced and what we actually think they're aimed to do. So army commanders, a massive change in this unit, being able to shuttle units around the map. That streamlines, again, in theory, unit maintenance, moving units around the map. I've still found that you have to do this a decent bit in Civ 7. Once you deploy your units, you still have to maintain them just as you would. But still, that is the intent of this change, right? Is to make that part easier. Towns create passive income. So even though there's a large discussion in the community right now about the kind of viability of towns and bringing that into question, still, you can still play with towns being a part of your strategy. And for a newer player, that's really appealing. I only have to worry about maybe 3 cities while my 3 towns are generating, production on their own. That is an interesting proposition, right? Legacy paths give you a clear objective at each stage of the game. So if I'm in Antiquity, I know exactly what I need to be doing. I need to be getting codices, I need to be getting wonders, founding settlements, and getting resources in my cities and towns, total resource count. That gives me a clear objective for that first stage of the game. Whereas in older games, you just kind of have these objectives that come far into the future that you really have no concept of or impact on in the first 100 turns of your game, for the most part. But in Civ 7, that's radically different, right? You have the ability to quote-unquote win 3 different times if you consider each age like its own game, which I do think practically a lot of players do, whether they kind of want to admit that or not. It does feel like they are kind of their own games. So yeah, legacy paths are huge. Leader and Civ combinations allow for these kind of specific strategies. So if you want to go into a game with kind of a clear military culture perspective, you can absolutely do that. And it's pretty easy to find leader and Civ combinations to suit that playstyle. I think that is appealing for a newer player who wants to come in and do something kind of their own way. I also think the customization is just a kind of fun step in the right direction, right? This is something that puts new players and veterans on a bit of a level playing field. Everyone is new to this, at least they were when the game came out, the system of leaders and civilizations meshing. I think that is a great change, and also I think just a more modern player base likes the ability to customize and tailor the experience more to their own liking, in a way. All of this with the ages system making the games much less daunting, much more palatable, I think all point towards this being a very intentional shift from Firaxis to try and snag some, a wider net, cast a wider net of players, get some maybe younger players into the franchise. I'm in my 30s, like I think a lot of Civ players are, 30s and up, and that is something that I think any developer has to have at the front of their mind is how do we grow this franchise long term? So in the next 10 to 20 years, what do Civilization games look like? I don't think they'll ever fully cater to a completely different generation of players in that way. I think at its core, Civ will always feel very much the same, this kind of tabletop hexagonal, board game style game, right? But I think that this at least shows that they are going to make some intentional changes to try and bring new players into the franchise, which I am personally all for. And I am because I really want this franchise to stick around for the long term, as someone who has played these games for a very long time. I started playing Civ games at a young age, and I hope that young players now are still getting into the game. I hope that is something that the young gamers are finding appealing in Civ 7. But overall, I just want to close with this. I think that Civ 7 is clearly a massive step. Whether you think it's forward or backward is certainly up to the individual, but I think this is a massive step forward for everyone. But overall, obviously, with changes like this, there's going to be people who love and hate the new system. We've been seeing several even streamers going back and playing Civ 6. So there's clearly some discontent within the community, either because of the current state of the game with balancing and some of the different patches that people are hoping will come through, or they just don't like the sweeping changes. However, whatever the case may be, I think this is, at least in my mind, a step forward for everyone. I find the changes to be extremely exciting for how to help the series grow and scale into the future. Like I mentioned, the younger generations, I think that they will get into this game. But for veteran players, talking to you all for a second, I think there's still obviously ways to dig into this game and discover all of the hidden layers of optimization that we're always on the hunt for. Right? That is, I think, the min-maxing is what longtime Civ players tend to gravitate towards. They want to find ways to optimize their leader Civ combination as much as they possibly can. I still think you can do that to a really exciting degree in Civ 7. But I think either way, at the end of the day, this has been a game that I have had a ton of fun with. It has been one that has challenged me, but I think that Civ 7, with the changes it has, is without a doubt the best entry into the franchise for new players. That's the core point I wanted to make today. But I'd be curious to hear what you all think. Is this totally wrong? Do you all fundamentally disagree that this game is good for a new player? Or are maybe these changes just better for veteran players? I would be curious how you all respond to this in the comments. Please let us know. But that's going to do it for today's video. I just wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about how I feel Civ 7 is performing as a game within the context of the franchise, and in particular, how it's going to scale with new players thanks to the changes it's made. But yeah, let us know in the comments what you think about this video, and from our house to yours, we hope you'll join us for one more turn. We'll see y'all next time.